start with that. Last 2 years, I spent as a ranking member on Intelligence and Counterterrorism for Homeland Security Committee. The greatest threat is twofold. One, it's to think that this is about politics instead of understanding that this is spiritual warfare. Ephesians 6 breaks this down really clear. This is principalities and darkness in high places. And a lot of the political things are just shiny objects that we chase. And understanding this, I had the chance to be the co-chair of the prayer caucus. About, let you know, 15 to 20 members of Congress each Monday when they fly in gather together to seek God's guidance and seek God's direction. Never makes the press because that's not what gets the click ourselves. But understanding that. Now, on the political side of it, the biggest threat we face is China. China's cyber attacks is now somewhere between 15 to 20,000 times per day. A lot of that's attacking a grid that controls all the power from the Mississippi River all the way to the East Coast. They're constantly working with it. We've seen the relationship with Russia and China evolve a little bit, and that is something. Russia doesn't have the same capabilities, even though they're certainly bad. China is determined, it's part of the DNA, to be the only world superpower. Why is that important? Well, America is exceptional because of our history founded on Judeo-Christian principles, right? America has 25% foreign-born citizens, 25% more than any other country in the world. We've taken about 1 million legal immigrants every year that become citizens. We've sent more missionaries, Mitzi, to remote places to bring hope and healing in the gospel of Jesus Christ. If we're going to be able to continue to be that beacon, we've got to make sure, number one, that spiritual warfare, we understand what it is, and two, we make sure that we get the... Look, you don't have one, you have 5 Bidens on the tape that have taken millions of dollars. To me, that's the trees in the sack, but nevertheless, those are the 2 biggest issues we're facing right now as a nation.
Good evening. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, I was born and raised in the Soviet Union. I moved here as an adult because I believe in the American dream. And I've been following politics for many years. And when I look at everything that's going on, at every single level of government, national, state, local, my biggest fear is that one day I will wake up in the Soviet Union again without ever leaving North Carolina. And I want my children to grow up in a country I moved to, and not in a country I moved from. And I want my children to be able to breathe air without mask and without fear.
Amen.
And the greatest threat is apathy.
Yes.
It's time for silent majority to stop being silent.
Amen.
Yes.
It's time to speak up. It's time to be vocal. I grew up in communism. It's a religion.
Yep.
It can take different names: communism, fascism, progressiveness. That's what they do. It's time to be vocal. If you think about it, 25% of the population identify themselves as being progressive. But they control the narrative because they are loud and they are aggressive and we are silent.
Yep.
The more we speak up, we can control the narrative. The more we keep telling the truth, the more we can stand up for our values, the better we'll be able to ensure that we're still living in our country and we enjoy the freedoms this country was built on.
I also think I would say twofold. I think the first, kind of going off what Mark said, I think somebody actually made this statement to me and it's just stuck for months, that the culture is changing the church rather than the church is changing the culture.
Yep.
Right.
And that's what we're seeing in schools. That's what we're seeing when people are saying, well, don't you care? Don't you want to keep people safe? Well, that's not based on truth. The church is too scared, literally. Fear is driving Christians rather than Christians standing up for what they believe in and bearing their cross and speaking truth.
Amen.
I think in more of a tangible answer, the thing that as my husband and I have just been following a lot of these topics that we're going to talk about tonight, the more you follow the money, the more you get answers. And so the more I follow the money, the more I see our federal government sending a whole lot of money for a whole lot of things that's not doing what it's saying it's doing.
Yep.
And I think we see that a lot in education.
Yep.
And it doesn't really matter how loud we scream at the Board of Education. Doesn't matter how much we say we're going to all quit our jobs and walk out of the medical field. If the federal government's sending the money, the people making the decisions in administration are going to say yes, sir. And so I want to go to our federal government and I want to stop the money printing and stop the spending.
Yes, amen.
The next question I have is, how can we restore confidence in voting integrity in our country, in our state, and in our community?
I think it's just a process. The first one, infrastructure, and the second one, responsibility. We need to ensure that we have Republican supermajority and we have Republican government, and we need to address the reform. We need voter ID. We need to address early voting. There shouldn't be no drop-offs. We need to make sure that there's no voter fraud. But with that infrastructure comes responsibility. And that means that once we have that system that ensures fair voting, that candidates should take responsibility. And if we lose, we have to accept that with dignity. We don't need every candidate to be Hillary Clinton every time somebody loses. So the system and the responsibility with dignity.
Well, let's go back and look at the 2020 election.
Do we have to?
I know, I guess it's no secret, running for the U.S. Senate, I'm the only kind of candidate out there calling this out for what it is. But the election was not fair and square. I'm on record, I'll say it here tonight, the election was not fair and square. Here's why. The history of this, you know the name George Soros. A lot of lobbying, even in the healthcare industry, you guys are talking, some of the healthcare people up there, they're pretty powerful. But when it comes to George Soros, his strategy was to lobby these, not just Democrats, but Republicans as well. The swamp's just as deep on the Republican side as the Democrat side. Let me tell you this, I've seen it firsthand. But what he started doing after the Hillary Clinton loss, they realized they had to make some adjustments. This is back for work out of the we will never rest, okay? These folks believe it's their moral cause, the end justifies the means, whether they got to lie, cheat, or steal, they do it every day. Just now starting to get fined. That's one of the things that President Donald J. Trump put a light on some of this. So here's what happened. George Soros began to take some of the hundreds of millions of dollars he used on the federal side and begin to lobby state legislatures. What they get him to do? They got him to change their election law. And they did it, some under the guise of COVID. Let's speak one word of COVID. I'm not a doctor. My wife's the family nurse practitioner over at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center. But let me tell you, in the words of James Clyburn, never let a crisis go to waste. So what they did and used COVID was a test to see how much liberty Americans are willing to surrender. Frankly, they were surprised just how much liberty. So what Soros did, he began to put these lobbying efforts in the state legislatures and even in Republican-led states. They began to change their election laws to send out these mass ballots. They didn't know who was filling them out. They didn't know who was collecting. They sure as heck didn't know who was sending them in. We've got to get that changed. Here's the thing, and I'll close it with this part. Be very careful that we surrender election law to the federal bureaucracies. That's what's all tangled in this Build Back Better junk, okay? I was a pastor for about 7 years. My language is getting more colorful. I've got to be careful here, right? Make sure, because each state, it's crucial to you, part of your question, to make sure, Amy, that we control that election law. Because if we ever lose that, America, I'm not doom and gloom. You talk about coming off the cliff in a hurry. That's what has to happen. Make sure we get voter ID accomplished and some of these other things where we never ever see what happened in 2020 happen again in our future.
Well, this is one of my favorite questions because it's actually kind of what pushed me to start running for office. Is my husband was the lead data expert on the Trump versus Raffensperger case in Georgia. Yay! Stand right over here. Raise your hand, Brian, if you want to talk to me. We have people looking, so raise your hand. It's my better half. I think we really saw how we were seeing the data, we were seeing what the voter registrations really looked like, the irregularities and the illegalities, specifically in Georgia. That's just where he got connected. And what's the most concerning thing to me is that our judicial system, we've kind of, I think as Republicans, we've kind of slacked a little bit on getting good judges in office. And so when you're going out to vote on your judges, make sure that you are voting every single time when you're talking about judges, because the election lawsuit he was working on started, or it was filed in early December, and it was not heard, unfortunately, by a judge. It was not assigned a judge because it had really good data, really good evidence, and they did not actually have to prove fraud to help prevent certification in Georgia. They just had to prove doubt. When you're trying to prove fraud, you're trying to prove intent, which is really challenging. He had very clear data that had it been heard by a judge, it was irrefutable because it was objective. It was related to what was in their own data. It was what was in the Secretary of State's own data. And unfortunately, the media just took that one because Trump called Raffensperger to settle the case. And instead of us hearing that it was a settlement to settle the case for my husband to sit down and work on the controls in Georgia, we all heard that Trump was pressuring the Secretary of State for votes, which was not true. So all of that story really led us to seeing how the media was telling one story and we were seeing something very, very different. And me being a nurse, I think just seeing how the same thing has happened with COVID, it's again, we've all been talking about truth, we're seeing a lack of truth. And so what I would say as far as, I'm very in tune with it, I know a lot of people love to say the buzzword of election integrity, but I can tell you my husband's still working on stuff with people, and we are very in tune with what's going on. But you see, I'm still running for office. I'm still hoping that we still have this republic and this constitution, this beautiful country that we all live in, and I'm running for office. So I need every single one of you to go vote and tell your friends and neighbors to go vote, because if we don't vote, we cannot win. And so I do believe we need to work on, I would say the buzzword for me is controls, and talking to our legislators, there we go. We need to make sure that we're looking at the data and looking at what is the controls, because from what we saw in Georgia and what we're seeing the same pattern in North Carolina is there's very little controls when it comes to giving out ballots and receiving ballots, and we need to work